Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Vinicius Machado from Texas Tech. My co-hosts, I got two of them. Vinicius, we usually just go with one. This is so important. You're so impressive that we had to have two. So we're going with Dr. Jeff Elliott and Dr. Pete Morrow. They're both technical service representatives from Balchem. Vinicius, would you mind just giving me kind of a little bit of background on yourself? What's your pedigree in terms of education and kind of your path to where you are today?
All right, so I'm originally from Brazil, and I got my degree in veterinary medicine in the Federal University of Goiás. That was 2008, right around when I came to the U.S. I worked under the supervision of Dr. Rodrigo Bicalho at Cornell University, got my PhD there in 2015, and then did 2 years of dairy medicine residency there on an ambulatory setting. And once I finished that in 2017, I went to Texas Tech to get a assistant professor position there, and I've been there since then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very well. So now I was looking at the title of your presentation, which was Management of Beef on Dairy Calves. Should we raise them differently? And so that's interesting. Can you give me a little bit of an idea of should we raise them differently?
And that's kind of like, once I was like preparing for the presentation, I was like, oh, that was a mistake to give that type of title, because once you go to a presentation where you have like a question in the title,
yeah,
you assume that the presenter is going to give you the answer, or at least like some good ideas about the answer. And then really I was like, oh, I don't have answers, like, to be honest. Like,
isn't that typical research? You come back with more answers than questions than answers.
Yeah, but you still expect to have some answers out of it. But I think we're such in the initial stage, at least on the research side, like to learn how these calves are, because before you change managements, like you actually have to understand what are the goals, right? What are the goals of raising these calves? And the co-author of the abstract and my colleague collaborator at Texas Tech, Mike Ballou, I talked a lot with him about this kind of things, and like calf management is not really my bread and butter. I work more on the reproductive sides, but Mike works a lot with calves, and talking to him, and we seem to understand that the goal of raising beef on dairy calves, it's a lot more short term than like raising replacement heifers. Because when you're raising replacement heifers, you're thinking about like how they're going to do when they reach lactation. With these beef on dairy calves, all you want to do is to get them on the right weight at the right age so you can sell them, right? So the owner of the calves, like, they don't retain ownership until they go to the feedlot, or when they get to the feedlot. So there's really this disconnect on what can we do better or differently during the even like pre-weaning period, that you have so many early life experiences that can impact their performance when they're mature, at least in terms of dairy cows, and we have no idea how that's impacting their performance in the feedlot later on. And then, like, when you think about health issues, especially related to liver abscesses, which seems to be a really big concern, I guess, of the industry right now. That's some of the during my presentation, I explore some of those possibilities, or some of those things that happen differently in the calf range that it's not happening, for example, on a cow-calf operation.
Yeah. I definitely want to come back to the liver abscesses later, but first, since the dairy farmers are not retaining ownership, are they not doing things, maybe from colostrum management or just when that calf is born, that's affecting that calf when she hits that beef operation?
Yeah, I think historically, I would say, I don't want to use this word, like, don't get me wrong, but like, let's say that the dairy farmer used to neglect double calves, right? I think historically that was the trend. Now I think things had improved a lot more. And to be honest, like you go to dairies, and the cows that are bred with a beef semen, they are marked because now like the dairy farmers are like paying a lot more attention to those calves, and they actually, I think they're doing as good with those beef calves as they're doing with their like heifer calves. So I don't think that's necessarily a concern. But again, like they sell them to a calf raising facility usually. Like you still see some owners, like especially larger farms, retaining ownership of those beef and dairy calves. But usually they just sell to a calf ranch, and the calf ranch really what they want to do is just like get those calves to the right weight, the cheapest way possible, which does not necessarily that is the bad way of doing things, but really like I don't know if we're optimizing or if we really understand what are the things that we can do differently so we can have those calves perform better in later on when they go to the feedlot.
Do you think there's any opportunity for these dairies to hang on to the calf, maybe through weaning? And I don't know if you've looked at the finances, but could they get more for those calves? Because if they haven't transported them, they know they've got good colostrum into them. Is there an advantage to doing that? Or
I wonder. I really don't know if that would be something they would be, because like from what I know, most people they just run out of space in their dairies. I think they would have to put up a lot of like infrastructure to hold like more of those calves. I've seen, like I was in a dairy the other day that the guy just built a bunch of like group pens. So instead of having individual hutches, which is what he's has been doing for his heifer calves, he just built up like he has like those super hutches and have group pens of like I think it was like 5 or 6 calves per pen, and that's like a little less costly, and he's holding for on those calves, and I think he's actually holding until selling to a feedlot. I don't think it's just through weaning. I think he holds until like the calves is about like I don't know, like 6 months of age, and then sells to a feedlot.
In the traditional beef industry, age and source verification has become very important. Do you see that coming as a possibility for these dairy calves?
What do you mean by that? Like,
Where they'd be born, and you know how old they are versus just a guessed birth date.
well, I think this is like, I feel that like if we go use the word traceability, I guess, I think that's way easier to do that in the dairy farm than in the beef, right? Because on the dairy, that we just collect data all the time. Like in the dairy farm, like there's data collected on, like in some dairies they even do like what was the total serum protein of that calf all the way through all health related events. Some farms they collect like birth weight, weaning weight, so they know like what was the average daily gain different times of the life cycle of the calf. So there's so much data, and I think that's one of the big advantages of the beef and dairy calves versus the traditional beef animals is just the traceability. At least on data, it's very strong on the dairy side and not so much on beef. So what I like to say is that like we have to find a way that we can not correlate, but like link all the information that we have during that like calfhood part of the life cycle with the performance later on in the feedlot. Because the feedlot also collects a lot of data, but I don't think they collect, and it's just hard to collect data like on individual animals just because they're all in group pens. Like you might have like some health related events, but not so much on like feed intake or individual weights, right? But once that's probably how research should go towards that path, that we can understand what are if the performance during early life and health events and so on is associated with the performance later in life. And so if so, like how can we change to optimize the production of those animals?
So we could use the abundant data available, and in the case of dairy, they would even know the sire
Yeah,
They'd have sire information, which would be pretty unique. Use that
Absolutely.
to create a more valuable product, even if it's just to the feedlots, or if they could retain ownership, possibly the end product.
And again, like I feel that like it's understanding what is being valued, right? Like if I'm a dairy farmer, right? Like my priority is to milk cows, to make those cows get bred or get pregnant on time, get good milk production, and then dairy, or at least in the past, like I want to say like maybe 5 years, you have this opportunity with those beef on dairy calves that they can get like a better price for those 1 day old calves. And that's kind of, but and that's the value they're getting. Like if they're gonna get any more value on all the data they are collecting, I really don't know if the beef part of this cycle is really interested in that. And that's where I'm like, they're probably not interested because they don't understand the value. And I think only through research that we can really say like, all right, so these calves here, they don't have like, let's say they double their, and that's like a benchmark that we use for replacement heifers. Oh, we have to double their birth weight by weaning, right? Is that really relevant for beef on dairy calves? If it is, like I think then we can market those animals a little better, and maybe like holding them like until they're weaned might be something that's going to be of economical advantage for the dairy farmer as well.
Almost like a certified preconditioning program.
I guess that would be like the way to go, right? Because right now, like we really don't know what to value because we don't understand what's important.
Yeah. Vinicius, one last question before we go. You talked about liver abscesses, and of course we're kind of in that business. Are you finding the liver abscesses, is it greater in these beef on dairy animals versus regular beef?
That's my understanding, that those beef on dairy calves, they have a higher prevalence of liver abscesses at slaughter, and
Any thoughts
greater.
on why that
Yeah,
is?
so it's greater than just Holstein steers, for example, and greater than traditional beef, right? So those purebred, let's say Angus just for the purpose of this. So, and we really don't understand exactly where that's coming from. So it became like a game of like, oh, let's blame the calf ranches because they're raising. Because if you compare the differences, there are so many differences. So those calves are transported early in life. They are usually on a restricted liquid feed diet, right? So they're not drinking milk as much as they could if they were just with their dams, right? Those calves are weaned, or at least they stop receiving milk about like, let's say 60 days of age. Some people even do like 45 days of feeding milk. And if you compare that again, like to the traditional beef system, they stay with their dams for like the first 6 months, and they're eating pasture, while those calves and like those beef on dairy calves, they're eating calf starter as a solid feed, and they're eating more calf starter than Holstein calves, and earlier too. So they're eating a lot more of that. And a calf starter, like I'm not a nutritionist, so don't get too hard on me on this. But my understanding, like the calf starter is like pretty comparable to a finishing diet in terms of energy. So I think a lot of people just think that we're preconditioning those calves to develop ruminoacidosis when they get to the feedlot, and because like, oh, if they get, and we know ruminoacidosis is a risk factor for liver abscesses. But again, like we don't know any of that. Could it be genetics? It can be that too. So we're still like trying to figure out and understand what's making that be such a problem. But again, I was talking to a professor. He was at UC Davis, so a lot of his current data is from there, like Pedro Carvalho, and he's now in CSU, Colorado State. He's more of a beef guy, and he is doing some work with beef on dairy animals as well. And while we hear about like, oh, 60% of some like 60-50% of beef on dairy animals are having like liver abscesses. His incidence was like 2%, 1% on beef on dairy. So it seems to have like some regional differences too that we really don't understand where that's coming from. We know that the feeding behavior of those beef on dairy animals, at least compared to Holstein steers, it's very different. So they drink more, like during the pre-weaning period, they drink more milk, they grow more. I'm not sure if they're growing more because only because they drink more milk. I think they also like are eating more calf starter, and that's just based on what we hear. But we just did a study, and those were weaned animals, and only 10 animals per group, and that we were not even like interested in comparing those. They were just like two different studies. One was with beef on dairy I was gonna call it steers because they're a little older, like 4 months of age, and we had some Holstein steers as well. And we were like, the study was we were not developing, but testing some different diets on development of liver abscesses, and it was with a model it's a challenge model for the induction of liver abscesses. The beef on dairy calves had 80% liver abscesses by the end of the study. The Holstein steers, only 30%. And they were on the same diet. We knew that those, like, then the data showed us that those beef on dairy steers were eating a lot more dry matter than the Holstein steers. And because the challenge model, you have like different cycles of like changing from basal diet to acidotic diet, and then basal diet again. You see that in the first change from basal to acidotic diet, both groups of animals, they decrease dry matter intake, and then they recover. And then once the diet was changing again, only the Holstein steers were dropping dry matter. The beef on dairy steers kept eating, and they never dropped again until they were orally inoculated with bacteria. So I think they're just like, it's just I'm not gonna say like completely different animal, but they have different behaviors.
There's definitely some unknowns.
Yeah, and
this.
we are again like we're pretty much like managing them the same way.
Yeah.
And I think we should manage them differently, but I don't know exactly how.
Well, I'm sure you're going to figure it out one day, and
day, I guess.
very important subject, and obviously more to know. Vinicius, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been very interesting, and it's a great one to end the week on. This is the last one this week. It's been a successful week, right? We've heard some great scientists. We heard from some great science, great scientists, great students. It's just been an amazing week. Want to thank our loyal listeners for coming along with us this week on our journey. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun, and I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.